and welcome to another booktube video from me, Lauren, from Lauren and the Books. I hope you're all doing very, very well. Tag video today, a tag that I've done before and have revisited. I was talking about this on my live show earlier this week, and yes, there's a tag that I did back in 2015, so 6 years ago. Over 6 years ago, because I think I did it in July, that Jen originally invented, called the time and place tag. This was early days of YouTube for me. Like, I'm still in my first, with my Mickey Mouse background, that's still happening, so still in, like, within the first year of doing booktube, I'm sure, and I remember watching Jen's channel and seeing this tag and loving watching other people's versions of it and doing it myself. And I often think back to that tag and how much I would like to revisit it. And then when I was doing my 15,000 subscribers live show, one of the questions somebody asked me is there a video you'd like to film again? And I always think about that video and I thought, yeah, it's time to revisit it. So the tag itself, it's a very simple but wonderful tag, where you pick 10 books and associate 10 memories with those books. So where you were when you were reading that book, or what time of your life it was when you were reading that book, etc, etc. If you look at my first video of this, and I'll link that down below, and I'll link Jen's original video as well, we're little babies in those videos 6 years ago. There's a lot of videos, there's a lot of books I've mentioned there that have that reminded me of points of my childhood and things like that. There are still 2 more books that remind me of my childhood, but these are more recent memories, I guess, because as I said, it's been 6 years since I've done this video. So here I have 10 books. Well, I say here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 books, 5 that I don't have here, and memories that I've been reminded of times of my life, which I just thought would be a lovely time. And like, as I said, do go back and watch mine and Jen's old videos, and I'm sure you'll find plenty more of these videos. It's just a nostalgia fest, and you know I love nostalgia. But yeah, I thought I'd reload it and give it another go, because I had such a wonderful time doing it all that time ago. Let's have a wonderful time doing it all that time ago again. So the first one I've got is Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. This was the first Daphne du Maurier book I read, and if you may well remember, Daphne du Maurier has become a favourite author of mine. Rebecca is probably my favourite book of all time by hers, but back in the day when I first got to Daphne du Maurier, this was the first book of hers that I read, Jamaica Inn, and I remember reading it, and it's set in the last week of November, and then sort of like on the run up to Christmas. There is nothing Christmassy about this book at all, but that's the time of the year it's set. But I remember David and I never take off time during the summer holidays, or during the summer, call it the summer holidays, that's just muscle memory, isn't it? I never take off time during the summer, because David and I aren't big fans of hot weather, but we'd taken 2 days off in August, and one of those days we went to a park local to us in Maidstone and took a picnic and just sat there all day and read. And I was transformed from this boiling hot park in Maidstone, sat there with my boyfriend on a blanket in probably sausage rolls, and was transformed to this windy, wet, Cornish moor, and the goings on of Jamaica Inn. Now, I remember it's such a lovely feeling, isn't it? And a few of these books have evoked that feeling where you can be completely transformed. Oh look, I've even got a bookmark wedged in here, to be completely transformed. And I remember sort of like looking up and being like, oh my god, I'm not actually here, I'm here in this hot park in the middle of the summer. And once I read Jamaica Inn, I was certain that there was no way this book was going to be beaten, that I loved it and it was going to be my favourite Daphne du Maurier. It's definitely due a reread actually. But then I went on to read Rebecca, which I loved, and I also went on to read My Cousin Rachel, which I also loved, and The Scapegoat, which I loved. So this has now slipped down to 4th place because of all those other books of hers that I've read. But yeah, that's my intro to Daphne du Maurier, and just reading it in the summer and being completely transformed to a wintry Cornish moor. Number 1. Next one is a similar feeling to that feeling that book gave me, in terms of transporting somebody somewhere, and that transportation happened last March, when the lockdown had just started, and that book is Glasstown by Isabel Greenberg. Now, when lockdown first started, it was, I mean, it's still mad now, isn't it? But like when that first lockdown got announced, and everyone was sort of, didn't really know what life was anymore. David and I run cozy reading night sort of like throughout the year, and we decided that we'd run cozy reading nights every other week throughout lockdown. Which is a night whereby you can just get cozy, read. It's very social and active on Instagram and social media and stuff, and it's sort of like a community or like a group activity that you can do from the comfort of your own home. So they fitted in perfectly with lockdowns, because everybody was at home and you were able to read and things like that. And that first week I remember coming back from holiday. David and I had been on holiday with my family to Centre Parks, and then on that week when we were driving home, I remember hearing like things on the news that like things were like going up a gear in terms of COVID and things like that. And then I remember being off the following week from work and trying to negotiate being able to work from home and things like that, and everyone being very fraught at work because there was lots of sick patients in, and a lot of the doctors I was working with sick patients. And every time I'd get home from work, I'd get straight in the shower, and because you still didn't know how contractable this disease was, and I was so worried about giving it to David, so frightened every day coming home, and worrying that I would be the person that would pass it on to David, because David wasn't leaving the house, so there was nowhere else he was getting it from. And everything just being so like here. It just felt so here. And on that first cozy reading night, I picked up Glasstown by Isabel Greenberg, which I bought, which is a graphic novel written. I've read a few of Isabel Greenberg's graphic novels and I love them all. Her illustrations are amazing. And this is a graphic novel of the 4 Bronte children. So the 4 we all know, Charlotte, Emily and Anne, and then their brother Bramwell, I think his name is, yeah, Bramwell. And this imaginary world that they've invented called Glasstown. And that night was the first night I actually felt like I could breathe for a while. And that's really down to reading as a whole, and reading and cozy reading nights and being involved in something, and like only concentrating on the reading that night, because cozy reading night happened like that all the time. So it just felt like a normal thing to be doing. And yeah, I remember feeling like my shoulders just going down for the first time in like about 10 days, and just being really pleased that I was able to do something normal, and that was down to reading, but also particularly this book, because it was immersive. There was pictures to look at and a storyline that I loved and things like that. So yeah, this was one of my favourite books from last year, and for that reason. Also, similarly, haven't got this book here because I've lent it out to my cousin Laura, and that's Grown Ups by Marion Keyes, which is a big old book, and I started reading that at the beginning of lockdown, and that was a nice thing to escape into. It was a big book, so I was really like invested in these people's lives. It's a family saga. Marion Keyes has written a few books. I've loved this book, and this was one of my favourite books from last year, but I haven't loved all of Marion Keyes' books. So I've read a few of hers that I feel like haven't aged particularly well, and some are a bit too on the old women's contemporary fiction romance side of the road, but other ones I've loved. What's the one? Oh, Rachel's Holiday. I loved Rachel's Holiday. She's actually making a sequel to that, which is out next year. But Grown Ups was a book that I could just sort of dip in and out of, and even if I read a double page and then sort of just laid back and thought, oh god, or like I was able to get immersed in it in a chapter, or sit and read for like a couple of hours. I was so grateful for that book being an escape for me. So whilst this was sort of like a one night only, because I read it in one sitting, but like that book being something that I could dip in and out of, and almost like a world I could go into and hear about this family's lives and all their different sort of romances and businesses and friendships and relationships and stuff. So yeah, that was also another book that relates back to the beginning of the pandemic for me. Now, in the first video I talk about The Twits, a Roald Dahl book, The Twits. This is number 4, by the way. And at the end of talking about The Twits, I say, oh, I could come up with a memory for any of Roald Dahl's books in my childhood. And I thought, well, why not? I've got all these memories associated with Roald Dahl books, and the one I wanted to talk about today was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So I read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I remember when I was in year 3, I remember having a really enthusiastic and energetic teacher in year 3, who gave us all parts in that. I actually can't remember my part in it, but we all had parts in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and she would read like the description and the narration, and then the characters would read their parts. I've got a feeling I was someone's mother. I can't remember whose, but I remember she did it quite well, because Augustus Gloop, who obviously there's a lot of fat phobia like sort of involved in that, for the part of Augustus Gloop, she cast the smallest little boy. We had a young lad in our class called Ross, and she cast him as Augustus Gloop. And I remember thinking at the time, like, she's really dodged a bullet there, and like she's done really well to cast this really skinny, tiny little boy as Augustus Gloop. And I remember the part when we were reading the part of him sort of being all swept down the river and up the tubes and stuff, and he was jumping from table to table, and she was really encouraging him, and I was just like, I ain't ever seen teaching like this before. Like, and I just remember that so vividly, and having such a wonderful time reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and obviously all the stuff, like we used to do topics. Do you remember that? Like, did you do that at school, where you'd pick something and you'd concentrate on that for a whole term? So there was so much like designing your own chocolate, and what would you be, like Mike TV's section, and if you could design a Gousto, a piece of bubble gum that had 3 meals in it, what would it be? And like all of this, and making golden tickets and stuff. And I just remember it so vividly. And I also remember vividly the crushing disappointment of reading Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator and just finding it shit. Just having like loved Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and just the imagination that's associated with that and how much fun we had with that, and then finding Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator a complete bore fest. So yeah, that's number 4. Next up, I've got The Bass Rock by Evie Wilde, and I remember this vividly. I remember starting this book. David and I had gone down to the beach on a windy September afternoon. So Septembers of recently, hashtag global warming, have been mild, haven't they? David's birthday's at the end of September, and we've been like on holiday with t-shirts on and stuff. When I was younger, I remember going back to school and September's being like cold and having a new coat and things like that. But this particular September afternoon, we went down to the beach and we were all wrapped up, jumpers, blankets, everything, on a blanket, and it was very grey, and we had hot drinks. And I remember opening this book and thinking, yeah, we're gonna have a nice read, we're gonna have a nice read. And here it said, I was 6 and just the 2 of us, my mother and I, took Bowie for a walk along the beach where she and Dad grew up. The shore a mix of black rock and pale cold sand. It was always cold. Even in the summer we wore wool jumpers and our noses ran and become scorched with wiping on our sleeves. But this was November and the wind made the dog walk close to us, her ears flat, her eyes squinted. I could see the top layer of sand skittering away so that it looked like a giant bed sheet billowing. And I was just like, oh my God, this is perfect. This is set now. Although it was September, I remember just being like cold and wrapped up on the beach with this hot drink, and there's people walking their dogs and things like that. And yeah, whenever I think of this book, I always think of that particular, opening that and reading that first paragraph and thinking, well, this is set now. So there we go, that's that one. The next one is also another childhood memory, and that's Nancy Drew books. And what led me to this memory is that recently I've been on my Libby app, which is an app that I use that's associated with my library, where I can get out audiobooks and ebooks. On there, one of the Christmas books they had was a Nancy Drew mystery set at Christmas, an audiobook of it. So I've put a hold on it. It's not yet. I don't know if I'm going to get it in time for Christmas. I think it's got like 9 weeks on it. But I thought, I used to read Nancy Drews when I was younger, and I remember going to the library and getting them out and getting Nancy Drews out to take on holiday with me. And I remember everything about them sort of like being really like cliffhangers at the end of every single chapter, so always wanting to read on. And I remember vividly a photo my mum has of me from being on holiday, and we always used to go on holidays to France and stay in like tents, and like go on campsites and stay in tents or mobile homes, and they'd always have like an on-site swimming pool. And one particular place we went to had an on-site lake, and there's a picture of me in a rubber ring in the lake reading a Nancy Drew book. Like, I'm not looking at the camera or anything, I'm just like reading the Nancy Drew book. And I remember that so vividly, and just being either in a tent or in a mobile home reading those books and just being beside myself thinking, well, I've just another chapter, I've got to find out what's happened there. Someone's just turned up with a knife or something like that. So yeah, I'll be interested to go, if I do get hold of that Nancy Drew book before Christmas, if I find it quite as compelling as I did back then. So there we go. And then the next one, another one associated with the pandemic, because I think the pandemic has just created so many sort of like embedded memories for me, is The Mothers by Britt Bennett. So I remember on one of the first sort of like normal days we had after the first lockdown, what is normal now, but David and I have got a membership to a place in Maidstone again called Leeds Castle, which is a castle and its grounds. And when they opened up to the public after the first lockdown, I remember it just being so brilliantly run, and a one-way system being in place, and everyone social distancing, and sort of like wardens to enforce this, and like it just felt really safe, and it felt really nice. It felt normal, like one of the most normal days ever. And David and I had taken books down to the and we sat by the lake and had a picnic again, sitting by a lake having a picnic. And David was reading Queenie, and I was reading The Mothers by Britt Bennett. And whenever I see this front cover or see Britt Bennett's name, it always brings me back to that time of just sort of, and also with Queenie as well, even though I wasn't reading Queenie at that time, David was. Like, I remember seeing those two books on the blanket and just thinking, oh, I'll always remember this day of being like a normal day that we'd had, and taking a picnic, and yeah, just things just feeling a little bit more normal after lockdown. So that's where this one comes in. Then the last book I've actually got here, which is which is a book that everybody will be very familiar with on BookTube. This is actually David's copy. This is Blue Monday by Nikki French, which is a highly popular series on BookTube because of Jen, the inventor of this tag and the inventor of my interest in Nikki French books. She had read all of these books, and there's actually a very good video on Jen's channel about all of the Nikki French books, sort of like in order, what's her favourite and stuff like that. And she'd read this series of books, which starts with Blue Monday, then it goes on to, I can't think what the next one's called, something, they're all named after days of the, Waiting for Wednesday, Tuesday's Gone, I think it might be called, Saturday Requiem. They're all different names of the week, and me thinking, my god, I can't wait to get invested in a whole big series of 8 books, because there's one for each day of the week, and then there's another one called Day of the Dead, following this psychotherapist, Frida Klein. So it's the Frida Klein series, and she works helping out the police sometimes with cases, or sometimes just solving these cases on her own. Each book is a different case, but they've got this thread that sort of runs through it, and I'd been so looking forward to getting invested into this series. Now, David and I always have these days in between Christmas and New Year, which we treat very lovely, which actually ended up being like what most of last year ended up being for us. So like, David and I, although not big sort of goer-outers, we were always very social people, going to people's houses for dinner, having people for dinner here, etc, etc. And that is amped up over Christmas. We spend one day with my family, one day with David's family, but also want to fit in our friends and family. We've got friends who are back here where we live, visiting their families before they go back to wherever they might live in the country, trying to fit everybody in. We'd always sort of put aside one day in between Christmas and New Year where we might have to say to maybe like, oh no, we're busy that day, or we're doing something that day, and just have this secret day of our own where we would just like look at all of our stuff that we'd got for Christmas and read some books, or read books that I'd put aside between this special time between Christmas and New Year. And I'd bought a second-hand copy of Blue Monday, not this one. This one we actually, that one I ended up lending to somebody at work. So many people at work read them after I'd read them. And David, we got this from the community library, and David's been reading it. He's disappointed me in that he hasn't just flown through it. But yeah, I remember reading it in between Christmas and New Year. It was about, well, 2 or 3 years ago, and just absolutely loving it. Starting it on Boxing Day night, knowing that I had the whole rest of the day just to read it, and I did. I remember just sitting there reading a bit, going and maybe getting a bit of cheese, sitting there reading a bit more, maybe having a bit of leftover roast dinner, sitting there reading a bit more, and then having finished it and being like, well, I need to get my hand on the second one, and knowing that it was, and looking at the library, seeing where it was, seeing if I could get it anywhere and get it delivered to me in time. And it was a library that isn't really local to us, but is in our sort of borough. So I remember driving there on the way to my cousin Laura's house, because we were going there for New Year's Eve, so this was New Year, so I'd read it in between Christmas and New Year, and then driving there and hoping that it'll be on the shelves, and it was on the shelf, and getting it out from there, and then just being so happy that I had this book and taking it with me and thinking, oh, when can I get this started? So yeah, that series and the beginning of reading that series always reminds me of the time in between Christmas and New Year. But then the rest of the series reminds me of discussing that book at work, because my colleague who I share an office with, she read it, and then one of the women who worked in our department, she read it too, and we would just talk about it constantly. So yeah, I remember the reading of these books vividly. And then the last two, which I don't have the physical copies of, and I'm really disappointed, I don't know where the physical copy of this has gone, and that's Ethel and Ernest by Raymond Briggs, which is a graphic novel by Raymond Briggs about his parents and their relationship with him, and it's cozy and autumnal and wonderful. And we read it for my book club, I think my online book club with my friends, but we actually read it around the time that I went on a holiday to Wales with another group with a group of friends. We used to go to Wales like every other year. and stay there in Pembrokeshire and just have a lovely time. And I took this graphic novel with me, read it, because it doesn't take very long to read it, and then there were 6 of us there and we gradually just passed it round, the 6 of us, and all of us read it that holiday. And yeah, I can just remember sort of like me reading it, and then I've got like a picture of Alex reading it in the chair by the window, and then later on seeing Amy reading it by like on the bed and then seeing Ryan reading it by, so like all of my friends had gradually like passed it round them. Yeah, that I've got lovely memories of that, and that's a lovely autumnal like cozy book to read. Sad but lovely. And then the last one is a very, very recent one, and I can't not mention this because the memory of this is so visceral, and every time I drive past this place I think of it. So I've recently read Fingersmith. I haven't even wrapped this book up yet. I wrapped it up on my Instagram, where I do my book reviews on Instagram, but I haven't wrapped up the book in a reading wrap up yet, by Sarah Waters. Now I've read all of Sarah Waters' books now, apart from Affinity. So this was my second to last book of hers, penultimate I believe they call it, I hadn't read, and I had a copy of it and I thought, no, I'm going to listen to it, and I had to, we were reading it for my book club with my friends again, and I listened to the audiobook, which is fantastically done, and it's narrated by Juanita McMahon, I think her name is, and she does quite a lot of Sarah Waters' books, but there is a moment, and I don't want to give any plot spoilers away, but there is a moment at the end of part 1 of Fingersmith where literally my brain just went something happened, a twist happens that I could not even begin to imagine that happening. The setup for it, I just didn't see it coming at all. And when I was listening to this moment, I was on my journey home. I drive on a bit of motorway and then a bit of dual carriageway, and this turn onto the dual carriageway I have to sort of like round a roundabout and go onto it, and that is when it was happening. And now every time, and I go into the office 3 days a week, every time I go on that I think about that twist in Fingersmith. So whenever I join that bit of road, I can't help but think about that twist in Fingersmith, because that's where I was when I heard it the first time, and it's just blown my mind that that's how imprinted in my mind it was, how shocked I was at that twist, and how it's just there. Every time I go that way on that road, I just remember that. It's a fantastic book. I gave it 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I'm devastated that I've only got one Sarah Waters left to read, Affinity. Might hang on to that. Sarah Waters, surely she's due us another book. She wrote The Paying Guest. I think I had a look into it, and I think The Paying Guest was written in like 2018, so it's been a good few years. So yeah, hopefully she'll have a new one coming out soon. So then I've got 2 Sarah Waters to read, but my God, yeah, Fingersmith, amazing. So there we go, the Time and Place book tag revisited, 10 books which have memories associated to them for me. I hope you enjoyed this. As I said, I love a bit of nostalgia. I love sort of like reminiscing about the past, and a lot of my memories are tied up with remembering what I was reading at that time, or I remember that holiday because I was reading that, or I remember that train journey because I was reading that. So this was a real joy to do again. Do it, guys, do it again. Even if you never did it the first time, just do it now. And yeah, I'll see you all again soon for another book tube video. Goodbye.